Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the 15th Salem Lit Fest. It's been fantastic. It's been fantastic so far, and there's still a lot to come later this afternoon. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. I'm Diane Stern, a member of the great team that brings you the festival every year. So grab your coffee, as I have, tea, smoothie, whatever gets you going on a Sunday morning. I'm very pleased to introduce this session. We call it Writing Lives Touched by Prison, and to introduce the exceptional authors on the panel. But first, here's a quick review of how this Zoom program will work. Our anti-harassment policy will be at the top of the chat, so you know the rules up front. We don't anticipate any problems from you gentle book readers, but we also want you to know it's important to us that you feel comfortable and safe. Please put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat, but the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to them by the end of the discussion. Comments can be put in the chat, but please make them brief so as not to be a distraction to our authors. If you need closed captioning, just check the box that says CC on your screen. And now to our panelists, and let's begin with Caroline Levitt, who is the New York Times best-selling author of 13 novels, including Pictures of You and her latest, Days of Wonder, which is a CBS TV book club pick and is now optioned for film, which is kind of exciting. Her novels have been translated into a dozen languages, and have been Indie Next Picks and selected for Best of the Year lists. A book critic for People magazine, her essays have appeared in New York Magazine, the New York Times, the Daily Beast, and more. She is the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, and some of you, of course, are familiar with that. It was born during the pandemic. It's fabulous, and maybe she'll tell us about that a bit later. Caroline is a New York Foundation of the Arts Fellow and was awarded a Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation grant this year for portions of Days of Wonder. And she joins us today from New Jersey. Thank you for showing your book. Jean Traunstein is an author, activist, and educator who's written extensively about the criminal legal system. She worked at Framingham Women's Prison for a decade, where she directed 8 plays for prisoners, resulting in her highly praised book, Shakespeare Behind Bars: The Power of Drama in a Women's Prison. Her work is considered the first Shakespeare prison program launched in the United States. Jean co-founded the women's branch of Changing Lives Through Literature, an alternative sentencing program. In 2018, she was invited to Italy. Now, we should say she's not in Venice right now, but she loves Italy. That's just a backdrop. She was invited to Italy to receive the Gramsci International Award for Theater in Prison for her 30 years of work in literature and theater. Mother Love, a book of short stories, is her first fiction. It's published by Concord Free Press, and she will tell us more about that in just a moment or two. Her 6 other books, from poetry to nonfiction, include Boy with a Knife and A Prisoner's Fight for Justice. We're waiting for Andre, who is in Colorado, and we will bring him in just as soon as we can. We grouped you together to explore incarceration themes, but of course it's about so much more. Guilt, forgiveness, the universality of human emotion, compassion, redemption, second chances, violent youths, single motherhood and parenthood, and families who continue to love their children no matter what. Of course, the books are very different from one to the other. Caroline, yours, Days of Wonder, is a novel. Could you summarize the plot for us?
Yeah, Days of Wonder actually was based on a true story of a friend of mine who one day over lunch told me she had something to tell me, which was that when she was 15 years old, she was charged with with murder and sent to prison for 5 years. She was early released after 5 years, and she set about taking on a new identity, changing her life, trying to make it until she was outed in her 40s, and she had to start all over again. That was the inception of the idea, but I didn't want to impinge on her privacy, so I turned it into a fictional Romeo and Juliet story about two 15-year-old kids living in New York City. They're both charged with an attempted murder. And the novel is really about, justice, injustice. Did they do it? Should they have been imprisoned? Should they not have been imprisoned? And that was the book.
Well, and it was wonderful. I enjoyed all of them. Jean, to you, a synopsis of Mother Love. I know it's a collection of short stories with similar themes. Tell us how that came about.
Well, Mother Love is a collection of short stories about the mothers of children who've killed people. And it's really it's fiction, based on my 30 plus years of, I call it interrogating the criminal legal system, meaning that um, I knew a lot of women, I know a lot of women who come out of prison. I really have been very involved in what goes on with reentry and well, I could talk about it a little later, particularly going to a parole hearing and having an experience at a parole hearing compelled me to write a story. I started writing it with nonfiction, and then I just had to turn it into fiction. And that one story led to another story. And this was before the pandemic, but a lot of the time during the pandemic, I was writing it, and I ended up finding my characters and traveling to find them, essentially, meaning where they might live, where they might work, where they might eat across the Commonwealth. So each story is based in a different town, and each woman has a different dilemma.
You know what I thought was really interesting, and I've bookmarked it, but at the beginning of each story, you put a newspaper headline and the story. I'm on Blur, so apologies for that. Can we? Okay, but anyway, you can kind of see that. Hello. Buy the book so you can see it, or get the book. Yes, we'll get to contact press in
I
just a
think
moment. Oh yeah, that's a little better. Anyway, that's an interesting way to start it off. Um, we'll stay with Eugene for a moment. Margot Livesey, who was with us yesterday in person at the Salem Literary Festival, she's a wonderful writer.
yeah.
She wrote, of course, a blurb for your book, Mother Love. And she wrote, murder involves the loss of two lives. But of course, it's more than that, isn't it? Entire families, communities.
I'm going to address, first of all, what you asked. You didn't exactly ask, but I'm just going to comment on why I put the news articles
Yes, if you
onto
would.
the story. And then I'll talk about that, because that quote from Margot was fabulous and very meaningful to me. I think the way the press portrays crime, criminality, people who commit crimes is very one-sided. And so my attempt was to show, I made those little things up. And Diane, I don't know if you know that they're supposed to sound like they weren't made up, but they were made up. But they show the difference between how the press sees people as monsters so often, and really what the truth of the story is, and which would be then revealed in my story. So I wanted to comment on that. And in terms of what you were saying about affecting families, absolutely. I'm struck by the quote, the it takes a village to raise a child, which the African proverb, well, it also it takes a village for someone to get out of prison and redeem themselves, redo their lives, find the meaning they have for their life. And I know a lot of people who've done that, and many people who have been very successful, but it is a process.
Absolutely. Um, as you know from your writing of fiction and nonfiction, there is a stigma about prison. The people behind bars are often written off as a lost cause. Incarceration has a tremendous impact on their lives. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Caroline, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I think there's an incredible assumption that if you've been in prison, A, you definitely are guilty. B, that is your identity for the rest of your life. And it's simply not true. There are people who get their degrees while they're in prison. There are people who definitely change and redeem themselves and come out and lead perfectly exemplary lives. When I was talking to my friend, she was so startled when she was outed because she had created a new life for her. She had friends, she had people who loved her, she had a profession, and all of a sudden it was back to the tabloid headlines for her. And it's a way of branding people, and it shouldn't be. It absolutely should not be.
Exactly. And Jean?
Um, I think one of what strikes me so often is that people really do not understand, number one, and this is, I've done a lot of research on this, that the people who have committed murder and then get out of prison are the safest cohort to rejoin society. It's not the people who have often committed one crime after another crime, kind of can't get off drugs, can't get out of the system. A lot of people who grow up in that kind of environment have a harder time. And, you know, that is something that struck me when I was reading Andre's book. And, we'll talk to him about it. But that kind of, being affected by violence over and over again really changes you, makes it difficult to change. But when you have spent a long time behind bars, when you have killed someone, when you have to reconsider what your life is going to be, you change. You want something. It's not that you don't think about your crime every day. All the people I know who've killed someone think about their crime all the time. It doesn't go away. And yet their desire is to make a meaningful life and make something of the life they have left.
Interesting statistic about those who have come out after committing murder and the likelihood of they're not reoffending. Very interesting. So, Caroline, you mentioned the word reentry. As you begin your book, there's a description of the sensory shock to your main character, Ella, on her release from prison. Would you mind reading that for us?
Oh, sure.
Do
I'd
you
love
mind?
to.
Yeah.
No, I would love to. Okay. This is when coming out. She came out after 5 years. She's only in her early 20s. Okay, New York State, April 2018. Ella stepped through the prison gate, blinded by the sun and the hard blue of the sky, frantically searching the crowd for her mother. At 22, she still felt so young, but certainly not the 15 she had been when she first arrived here. Freed, as if from a box, she stumbled forward, but kept her eyes on her feet. If she fell, she knew she wouldn't be able to get up. She clenched the paper bag containing her belongings, everything except for her old cell phone, which the police said they were keeping indefinitely. The air felt buttoned too tight about her throat. Colors vibrated. The gaping sky looked as if it might swallow her. What scared her the most were the news vans, the reporters rushing towards her, their voices like thorns. Ella, 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 they shouted. Though she was surprised by the media's presence, their frenzy was nothing new. They had roiled up public opinion against her from the start. The New York Times had blared, Queen's teen plots murder of Upper East Side judge. That's basically it.
Yeah. Yeah.
People love tabloid stuff. People love true crime.
Right.
People love to make a story out of things that often are a very different story from what they believe it is.
Yes, that is true. Well, look who's joined us from
Hi, everybody.
Colorado.
Hi, Andre.
Andre,
Hey, nice to see you. I'm in
no
Silver
problem.
Springs.
No problem. We gals have been chit-chatting and about the books and all that. So let me give your bio, Andre. Andre Dubus III's 9 books include the New York Times bestsellers House of Sand and Fog, The Garden of Last Days, and his memoir Townie, a number 4 Times bestseller. His work has been included in the Best American Essays and the Best Spiritual Writing anthologies. And House of Sand and Fog, a finalist for the National Book Award, was made into an Academy Award nominated film, and it's likely that a lot of you have seen that. Andre's 2013 novella collection, Dirty Love, was listed as a notable book by the Washington Post and the New York Times and was named a Times Editor's Choice and a Kirkus Starred Best Book of 2013. His novel Gone So Long was named among the Boston Globe's 20 Best Book of 2018. And his most recent novel, Such Kindness, was an Amazon Best Book of 2023, Top 100. His acclaimed collection of personal essays, Ghost Dogs on Killers and Kin, and we'll be discussing that this morning, was published in March. Andre is also the editor of last year's Reaching Inside 50 Acclaimed Authors National Magazine Award for, on 100 unforgettable short stories. He received a Guggenheim Fellowship, the National Magazine Award for Fiction, 3 Pushcart Prizes, and an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature. His books are published in over 25 languages. Andre teaches at UMass Lowell, and he lives in Merrimack Valley, but again, he's joining us this morning from Colorado, where it's just after 8 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for making that sacrifice, Andre.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. And thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late for the conversation. What are we talking about? What do you want to talk about?
Oh, we're just going all over the map.
Can I ask my question that I had?
Sure, go ahead. Have a conversation, Hall.
Hi, Andre.
Hi.
First of all, I just want to mention that you and I have a student in common who, Dave Maloney, who I taught at Middlesex. I know, the best. And best writer.
Wonderful writer.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my books often touch on something that I think your books also touch on, but in a different way. When I wrote Boy with a Knife about a young man who had killed someone when he was 16, and all the mothers who in this current book, Mother Love, are dealing with their children who've killed people, I did not explore sort of the roots of the violence. And what was so interesting to me in Ghost Dogs is your discussion of violence and young men. And I really wish you would talk about that. I thought that was a really great illumination, and and you approached it from an angle that, you didn't continue the violence. And I think that would be helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that, Jean. Yeah, it's I was a bullied kid in tough mill towns in the 1970s, and I was just talking about this yesterday. If you know violence yourself as a victim, you tend to either have 3 reactions. One will either fight like hell, run like hell, or freeze. And I was a kid for a long time until I was about 14, who froze. And in writing my memoir Townie that came out 2011, it gave me a lot of clarity on why I was freezing. I was freezing not just because I was terrified, but because I was also trying to rationalize, why is this guy punch me in the face? I wasn't mean to him. I didn't say anything to him. I wasn't disrespectful. And the Tiananmen Square massacre, we don't talk about it nearly enough. It's been buried by world history. It's been totally excised from Chinese history. I bring it up because I read about the massacre in the summer of 1989 in the Times. And there's this moment where one of the Democratic leaders, who's 23 years old, gets shot by an approaching soldier. His girlfriend, who was also one of the leaders, is screaming at the soldier, and they're all the same age. Why? And he shoots her to death. And I'm weeping reading this article by a war correspondent from Britain. But it got me thinking in that moment, okay, she was still innocent. And it seems to me that you lose your innocence when you no longer ask why to brutality. You no longer ask why to ugliness and injustice. And that happened to me. I snapped when a grown man beat up my little brother and I couldn't defend him. And I began to changed my life. I began to work out and box, and I began to look for fights, and I got into so many of them I can still, at this age, not remember them all. So I was a very violent young man for years. Please understand, I went after victimizers. I especially went after men who beat up women, and I put them in the hospital or tried to. And I came close to killing a man once, and I got close to being killed myself. I'm condensing my story to answer your question because I have a deep personal relationship to it. I I changed. I stopped this. This little voice we all have, intuition, as you may know, comes from the Greek or the Latin. It means to watch over or to guard. And there was a part of me that knew that I was going to die doing this, or maybe worse than that, I was going to kill another human being, me who actually hates violence and hates cruelty. And I stumbled across creative writing, and writing gave me another way to express myself. And I've been writing since, and that's now about 40 years. My point is, whenever I come across a tough kid, I don't see a tough kid. I see a scared kid. I see a kid who hasn't been loved enough. I see a kid who hasn't been held. I see a kid who hasn't been seen by an adult. I had this one boxing coach. You know, my dad lived elsewhere. I didn't have any adult relatives. They all lived in Louisiana, 2,000 miles away. We moved a lot. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was an isolated kid who fell through the cracks. And I had this one boxing coach give me like 10 minutes of his day once. And it changed my whole life just to have male attention for 10 pure minutes, looking at me and telling me what I was doing wrong with my punches or doing right. And I could feel my life go about 3 degrees that way to the light. And so I am intimate with violence, and I've learned to hate the sin and not the sinner. And I think it's really important that yeah, I love talking to kids in prison and men in prison. I had this incredibly beautiful experience not long ago where I taught a writing workshop to 34 lifers in San Quentin, and I felt like I was and you know, this is going to sound outrageous, but I felt I was with my brothers. And and I said to them, and these are guys who've done terrible things. I don't know who they killed, but they all kill people. But what I said to them before the writing class was, you guys, I was maybe one kick or one punch from being here too, from, you know, and I'd met guys. Well, I punched him, he fell, hit his head, he died. I'm in here for manslaughter. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but I feel the need to sort of tell my little story that I wrote about in that memoir. And then, of course, in Ghost Dogs, what I write about in that final essay, Relapse, is how my violence as a youth has affected my grown children. They've never seen me violent. They've never seen me rage. They've certainly never seen me rage at them or their mother, because I don't. But they know that there's blood on my hands. And it's had an effect, I'm sure.
It's such a
I feel like I went on. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's such a hopeful message, and I'm curious, the men that you've talked to in prison, has there been a follow-up on, you know, their lives afterwards? I would think meeting you and hearing your stories would be life-changing.
Well, sadly, these guys are never getting out. I mean, these are guys who are never getting out of prison. They're going to die there. And no, I haven't heard from them. It was a 3 hour, and I taught with the great Tobias Wolff. We did a co-class together. And these guys were preparing for, they've been working on their writing for a year, and they were preparing to read it to their families who were coming for the reading. And so they were practicing their readings, and they wanted notes from me and Toby. And it was so moving. And so many of them wrote beautifully, by the way. And there was this one young man I'll never forget. I'll ever never forget him. Handsome, big, beautiful black man. He looked, I mean, just huge and beautiful and articulate, and was writing this gorgeous piece, very disturbing piece about the COs rousting them all out of their cells at 5 a.m, taking them all on a bus, one at a time, putting masks over them. There'd been a fight, and one of the COs had been attacked by an inmate, and they took retribution on the whole floor. And one at a time, they would throw an inmate down the stairwell, and then, you know, 8 or 10 COs would beat them with with their clubs. And the piece was so beautifully written. I mean, he put us in the whole experience. And at the moment where he is now at the bottom of the stairwell being beaten by all these men, the last line is something like, "Oh man, this is all? Oh, I know how to do this. I can do this." And it was hard. It was so moving. It said it all. I've been beaten all my life. And, he killed someone. I don't know his story, but I sure liked him and I sure loved his writing. And he'll never get out of San Quentin.
Yeah, there's so many other parts to that individual aside being a murderer. The labels that people who do manage to get out. Oh, that's the felon. That's the one who killed that one, or that one was involved in. That is a theme in your book, Caroline, and also, of course, we see it in your book, Jean. But we discussed that about the label and how do you ever get rid of it entirely, or you don't.
I think people are just really afraid that once in prison, you're going to do it again. I mean, there's the example I always think of is like, how do people reinterpret themselves? Somebody like Charles Manson repeatedly said if he was ever let out of prison, he would kill again. He would do it again. However, the other Manson girl, whose the name just flew out of my head, who was not paroled for years and years and years. While she was in prison, she got college degrees. She was a peer leader. She had totally changed. But yet, when she was finally paroled, there was a lot of outrage from people because of something she had done when she was under the influence of drugs and a very young girl under the influence of Charles Manson. I think for some reason it scares people to see that change.
I think that that's a really good point, but I also think that people do not want to look beyond the label. It's much more convenient for people who are outside of prison to say, sort of referencing what Andre was talking about, this is a violent person, as opposed to this is a human being who happens to have done something which was on the worst day of their lives. I wouldn't want to be judged by the worst day of my life. And I don't think any of us would be. But that is what happens to people who've gone to prison most likely. Now, I will say that there is a lot of change that's occurring in this country because of the remarkable things that people are doing who get out of prison. I mean, I can speak of one woman, Stacey Borden, for example, who was incarcerated at Framingham, an amazing woman who she came out and she started a reentry program for women, New Beginnings reentry. That's happening all across the country. People are getting more opportunities to get rid of those labels. But it takes a lot of work because, I mean, we still have the check the box, so you can't go to college, private colleges. Many colleges don't allow people who are convicted murderers or even have convicted of, other kinds of crimes. And you can't get jobs. So that's really difficult. But I think there's a convenience that is what really, people don't want to look beyond the labels.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I jump in on that? I think about a line from a Tom Waits song. There is no God, no, there's no devil, there's just God when he's drunk. Now that's going to sound blasphemous to many ears, and forgive me if it offends you, but
And on a Sunday.
yeah, and on a Sunday. But I love that line because I frankly, it's my theology. We're all born beautiful babies needing love and care, and we all want to grow up and be respected and make some contribution to the world and be seen and cared for and vice versa. And we all mess up. And I do want to jump in on this thought that I am all for consequences, and I'm sure you are too, for people who do terrible things, and I'm all for corrections. I worked in a halfway house for convicted adult felons 40 years ago in my early 20s, and it really shaped me in many ways. It was a really progressive program where there's a lot of training, as Jean was saying. There's a lot of training to to correct, to rehabilitate, not just to punish, and to actually get someone who's done terrible things or a terrible thing onto a road where they don't need to do it anymore, but you have to rebuild their entire self. You know, one of my novels is called Gone So Long, and I wrote from the point of view of a man whom I had met at Walpole, who had killed his wife. I was interviewing him for a screenplay I was writing about another inmate. This is years ago. And it was just a research lunch I had with him in the Midwest. He was out of prison for years. And he was lovely. He was polite to the waitress, which to me is always a measurement for me. Are you polite and respectful of the waiter or waitress? He was really just a sweet man who gave me about 2 hours of his time, and it really helped my project. And as I'm paying the bill, I said, "Hey, man, I know I'm not supposed to ask, but what'd you do time for?" He said, "Oh, I killed my wife." And I just have a particular hatred of violence towards women from men. And then he said he stabbed her to death. And I could hardly breathe. And I just wanted to pay my bill and get the hell away from him. But what I could not change was the fact that I still liked him and that I had still enjoyed those 2 hours. And as we're walking down the hallway to the parking lot, I said, "Well, do you have kids?" He said, "Yeah, but they don't want to see me." And that one question, that one statement gave birth to the whole idea for that novel. But my point is, I could not erase the fact that I still liked the man. And you know, he went on to tell me that he thought he was just a kid. He was drunk. He thought his wife was going to take his kids away from him. He didn't know he had parental rights, and he lost it in a terrible 30-second thing. Is he to be forgiven? Maybe. Who does that? I don't know. He did 15 years. Is that enough? Probably not. For those who love this woman he killed, for her kids especially, I find it to be such a moral quandary. Yet he had changed his life. He was out of prison for 20 years and never committed another crime. He had a very, very successful landscaping business, had a beautiful partner, was active in his church. Was probably never going to commit a crime again, but he did the worst thing you can ever do to another human being. But what do you do with that? Do we call him a murderer forever? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I guess the reason I'm trying to share that Tom Waits line, "There is no devil, there's just God when he's drunk." And to your point, Gene, and the others about the label, we stick to the label. It's just morally lazy, I think, of all of us human beings to think that we are not also capable of such ugliness.
Right. We're all human.
We're all human. We're
Yeah.
all human. And I think we're all capable of doing great things. We're all capable of doing terrible things. No activity is beneath me or above me. I'm a fellow flawed human being.
I think that's why people are afraid when people come out of prison. I mean, my friend had such bad experiences with people. Once they knew that she had murdered somebody, they didn't want to be a friend, they didn't want to be in a relationship. And so her solution was, it was so sad. She had stopped trusting people. She never had a real relationship after that, other than with a few trusted friends. And it was so sad to me because it was just what you said. Yeah, she did something completely horrific when she was 15, but she had turned herself into this wonderful person that, you know, why can't you hold two thoughts in your head at the same time? That somebody did something terrible a long time ago, but now they're a different person and they're somebody who would be worthwhile to know.
You know, Caroline, that makes me think about the amount of trauma that prison creates.
Right.
And I think that, you know, unless you've been in a prison, worked in a prison, really examined prisons, you know, I can say from teaching in prison for 10 years that I saw how I felt trauma just from teaching in prison for 10 years. I mean, you know, I'll never forget how when I went into prison, I used to try to keep my gold necklace under my turtleneck with this sort of FU to the guards, like they're going to search me, but they're not going to find my gold necklace, you MF. You know, I felt so angry at how the system humiliated, debased, and really, and it created its own set of trauma. So it's not just that people are traumatized, which of course they are, because they usually you don't end up killing someone unless somehow you have been in some world, some lifestyle, something where you get close to that. I mean, even if it's an accident, but I mean, most murder is not intentional. Most murder is second degree or manslaughter, not first degree murder. Um, or, at least that would be the conviction. But my point is that the the trauma created by prison, and I respectfully will sort of disagree with something you said. I don't think 15 years is, I think 15 years in a prison is absurd on a certain level. No other country in the world, except the United States, sends people, I mean, no other, quote, Western country, I won't talk about a lot of countries, but we send people to prison for longer times. We send more people to prison. We are the most punitive nation in the world.
Mm.
And I think um, that is something that we have a history of, punitiveness.
Yeah, and it needs to be correction and rehabilitation. Yeah, and I think are we all in agreement that there are a small minority of criminals who actually should never ever be let out again? There
Yeah.
are those
Yes.
who are so
Small,
damaged. They,
small,
yeah, but it's a tiny minority. It really is. It's
but
just
it
that
dominates thinking. That's the problem, Andre. It dominates
that's
people's
yeah,
thinking.
that's why I'm bringing it up. It dominates thinking because it
Yeah.
dominates our fear impulse, and it's just a handful of whack jobs we can never let out again. But the overwhelming majority, what, 97%,
Yeah.
you can work with these people.
All
I
right.
agree.
I have a question. So is it fair to say that you'd all like to see a change in policies regarding prison reform and gun laws? And without getting into politics in this very fraught election year, do you consciously put a desire for policy change in your writing? And whoever wants to take that, or all of you.
Well, I'll start.
Well,
I do
Jane,
nonfiction. Oh, sorry.
no, please go ahead.
Well, in my nonfiction, Diane, I do that. In my fiction, no. Except that I will say that when I wrote Mother Love, it was from the point of view of women whose children are in prison and whose children have been convicted of murder. So each woman has her own position on that. Um, but I don't think you can write, well, I don't know. My opinion is you can't be didactic in your fiction. You have
Right.
to let the fiction go where it goes.
Right.
Caroline, you can speak to that too.
Yeah, I mean, fiction is very, very different. You want to have the characters tell the story, and you never want to, just come out and say what your position is. You want the story to sort of say that position. But I never consciously think of that when I'm writing. I think more about the characters. And I actually wanted to ask you, Andre, a question about, because you write both memoir and gorgeous fiction. When you were talking about writing memoir, you were talking about how you were changed after you wrote it. Do you feel the same way when you're writing fiction? Does one do more for you than the other?
Yeah, but first I want to jump in with both of you. I totally agree.
Okay.
I totally agree about trying to stay away from any sort of didactic stance in fiction. Otherwise we become the great puppet master and don't let our
Right, right.
agency. There's a wonderful line from Flannery O'Connor. She says, "A writer's beliefs are not what she sees, but the light by which she sees." Right. And so your view of the world is going to come out anyway in your fiction, whether you want it to or not. And I let it happen. Caroline, thank you for that sweet comment. Yeah, fiction to me, every time I finish something, I feel like I've just hurt myself. I mean, I finish a novel and I need aromatherapy and and therapy and hugs. And then I never want anyone to read it and I want to apologize for it. But I don't know. I try to get deep and I try to stay raw and I try to let the characters really do the thing. I want to say one thing about Gunzo, if I can. There is an essay in this new book, Ghost Dogs, called "If I Owned a Gun." It's the longest one in that book. And I have a love-hate relationship with guns. I grew up with them. My dad was a Marine. I shot my first gun when I was 6, and I love them as tools. You know, I'm a carpenter and I love tools, and some guns are really quite beautifully made, but I despise them. And I would, of course, like to see them all gone. They're never going to be gone. You know, in this country, we're 330 million people. There are 3 guns for every human being in this country. If you own a handgun, you are 400 times more likely to get shot. So
Mm.
I despise guns, and yet I love them as a young man, just as a tool. But yeah, I'm all for gun control, and I'll say it in my nonfiction all day long.
Me too.
AR-15s, assault rifles, weapons of war, they should be illegal.
Mhm.
No one should have access to it. Full stop.
Andre, could you, do you have your book in front of you?
I don't. I wish I did. I'm sorry.
I do. I just
Oh.
happen to have it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Whoops, wrong side.
I like the cover. I think they did a nice job.
Oh, yeah. Let me see if, oh, how can I do this? You know, I've got that, oh, here
Put
we
it
go.
closer, put it right up against the green light that's the camera. Oh, whoops, nope, I'm wrong.
Oh,
Pull it
boy.
back. Pull it back.
Pull it back.
Yeah, pull it back some more.
Oh, don't worry about it. It's a nice cover. It's a cool haunting image. I love it.
Not working.
Yes, go look for it and you can see it and then buy it.
Go buy the book just for the cover.
Oh, here, it's a little better.
There it is, that's
Yeah, there
good.
it is.
Here, okay.
Nope.
Well, then I will read it. This is the last line of that, if I owned a gun, and I just thought it was so beautifully written. One day it may just be me and Fontaine is your wife out here in the woods. And maybe it'll be my time to be old and frail, and I'll want that loaded gun in my hands. I will, but I can't, and I won't. I will not have it there calling to me the way guns do. That was so beautifully written.
Well, thank you. They do call you. You know, I have a story in that long essay about I illegally brought a 22 rifle to New York City in the 80s. I would have gone to Rikers Island for, I broke the Sullivan Law. I brought it because I was worried that my girlfriend might get raped and killed. So I brought a gun to New York. This is what a crazy young man I was. And again, we haven't talked about gun violence. You know, I was in a fist fighting time where, you know, we weren't all shooting each other then. And a bird flew into the apartment, and I'm going to compress this story, but I ended up shooting that bird. But it was a tiny little studio on the Upper East Side of New York, but there was a barred window, and all I had to do was open the bars, and that bird would have flown out of the apartment. But I believe that because I owned a weapon, it called me to it before Creative Solution did. And I killed that bird when, if I didn't have the gun, I would have been forced to sit in my creativity and my fear and open the damn window. And that bird would have lived another day. And so guns, no, we can't handle them. We cannot.
And of course, so many people are in prison because of guns and, you know, the accessibility of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you grow up with guns?
No.
Was that part of your life at all?
No, not at all. But I will say one interesting thing that happened to me about weapons. So when I was researching my book, Boy with a Knife, about Carter Reed, who killed someone when he was 16, and he stabbed someone in a classroom. And I had heard, you know, I got a letter from him asking me to help him with parole. And anyway, I ended up researching, and I was really shocked because I had no idea that people took knives to school. And they took knives to school because they were afraid of the neighborhood they lived in. And Carter felt he was a small kid. He didn't see himself as a tough kid, but he felt he needed protection.
Yeah.
And this notion of needing protection was something that I mean, my dad was a Marine. We had guns in our house, but I didn't even think about that. My dad didn't use the guns. They were there. My brother had guns in his house after my dad had guns, but I never even thought about it. And the fact that Carter had to carry a knife, it just, you know, as a professor, someone coming into my class, imagining them having a knife, it just kind of floored me.
Yeah. Yeah, when I grew up, we carried, I didn't, but my buddies carried buck knives. Everyone had a buck knife. And one of my best friends was stabbed in the hip by a young man who was terrified of him, by the way. And it nipped his liver, and he almost bled to death in high school, and he was home for 3 months. And it was just, right before first period, knife in the hip.
Right.
It's we have to find another way. I do think that there. What do you all think? I mean, when I love working with young people today. I think it's such a beautiful batch of humans. They're less sexist than we were growing up, less racist, less homophobic, less materialistic, love
Right.
the earth more, are understandably pissed off at us about the condition of the earth. They're anxious as hell, depressed as hell, experimenting with their gender and their sexuality, which I think is healthy as hell, and I have no problem with their pronouns. And I don't think they're as hung up about the way I was, and a lot of my friends, about being a man. A man knows how to kick
No, they're
ass.
not.
They're not, but
They're
they
not.
are terrified and anxious. And some of them, and as we know, it just happened a few days ago in Georgia, will
Right.
walk into a school building with an AR-15 and shoot innocent human beings, 14 years old and older. So what do we do about that? Well, let's start by not having AR-15s in the house, and,
Right.
and not having fathers buying them for their 14-year-old
Right.
children.
Right.
Yep.
Right. That kid was a product of his parents. They
Yes.
had a lot of guns in the house. There was violence in the house.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I think that we shouldn't go down that path, because I'm really against prosecuting parents for the quote sins of their kids. That's a whole other story.
Oh, a whole other panel.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
whole other
It
panel. That's a
really
whole other
is.
panel.
Yeah. It was
I
an
don't know.
interesting article on that in the New York Times, if anybody wants to read it.
I
I
guess
will.
today's Times.
Yesterday, I think it was. Was it
Oh,
today?
okay.
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 I will, because it's a fraud issue. I have to be honest, though. I lean towards prosecuting the hell out of them. But
Okay.
Uh-huh.
I
But-
lean toward not, but that would be a good discussion. I'd love to have that discussion.
we'll hold that for later. Yeah.
But Shane, what about the mother of this shooter had known that this kid was prone to do a school shooting a year ago, and she had asked for help a year ago, and nothing was done. Don't you think the parents bear some responsibility in that case?
Oh, of course, but that's why I say let's not go down this route, because I think it's really complicated.
Okay,
And I do think that there's a lot of dimensions to it, and
okay,
where we can go with prosecuting the families of the children could also lead to, I think, kind of something very fascistic across the country. I think there's a lot of different dimensions we have to look at. I certainly think there's responsibility. And I know just from writing Mother Love, and I will say, I am not a mother, and I wrote a book about 10 mothers, because you don't have to be a mother to feel motherly.
That's true.
And but my mothers pretty much each feel incredible guilt for what their son has
Right.
done. I think one of the questions is, why does someone not feel guilt for what their children has done? I mean, there's a lot of questions, a lot of psychological questions we have to examine here. So that's all I want to say.
right.
Right.
I agree that it's very complicated, and it could be a slippery slope to all sorts of weird consequences for people 5 chains down the route. Yeah. Let's talk about that another time.
Yes, indeed. We do have some questions from the audience. And maybe this is a question for you, Jean. Can you talk about parole boards? A majority comprised of cops, ex-cops, and all political appointees?
Sure. Well, let's start with Massachusetts, since that's where we are, but I can say it varies across the country. In Massachusetts, the governor appoints members of the parole board, and then they're confirmed by the governor's council. Unfortunately, and we have a statute that says who can be on the parole board, and I think that's true across the country. Yes, they are definitely political appointees. Yes, they are mostly from law enforcement. We finally have somebody who's a social worker on our current parole board, and that's taken a long time. But most former POs, former probation officers, parole officers, from forensics. We have a forensic psych, but she was a forensic psych, as in worked on cases in court, and she's great. But parole boards have a really difficult charge. They have to decide that they can let someone out who they feel is safe to be in society and will not recommit crimes. That is the parole board's charge. And when the parole board fails, they get all hell from the public and from everyone. So there's a lot of fear about letting people out. And therefore, in many states across the country, the paroling rate is minuscule because of the fear of being accused of letting people out when they shouldn't get out. Also, parole boards often do not consider more than the crime enough. They just consider the crime instead of how someone has changed. Usually you come before a parole board, all different kinds of ways. You can be a lifer parole board if you've killed someone, but there's also parole boards that are in, for all different kinds of crimes. And sometimes in some states, it's very difficult to get parole, and there are some states that have no parole.
Okay,
Gene,
thanks.
can I ask a follow-up on that?
Sure.
Are parole boards ever legally liable? If they parole someone who goes on to kill someone, can they be gone after legally, or are they protected from that?
They're not gone after legally, but they're fired. That's what happened with Deval Patrick when, if you remember, Dominic Sinelli killed a police officer.
Yeah.
And then after he got out of prison, and then Deval Patrick, our governor at the time, fired, although he would not say that, basically accepted the resignations of 5 of the 7 parole board members.
Mhm. Got it. Thank you.
Here's a chance to toot your own horns, all 3 authors.
Hmm.
Tell us what your readers have said about the books we're discussing today. Jean, you're laughing.
Oh, okay. Well, you can start somebody else.
Somebody else can start.
Oh, that's you, Andre.
Oh, after you, Caroline.
Oh,
I have to tell you that
that's the one question authors don't really want to talk about.
Well,
It's kind of,
Oh,
let
books are great.
let me speak to that. As someone who writes, I don't know. Look, I never Google my name. I do not read my reviews. I've never gone to Amazon. By the way, I've never bought anything from Amazon and never will. So I don't know what people say. If my wife will tell me it got a nice review, and I won't even. I don't. She'll like say, I got to read you one sentence. I said, no, I don't want to hear it. And I'll tell you why I protect myself from all of this. There's a wonderful line from Nadine Gordimer, the great South African Nobel Prize winning novelist who died years ago. But she's got this wonderful line from a character in one of her novels who has an insight as to what sincerity is while she's talking to her friend. And this is the line: sincerity is never having an idea of oneself, which I think is really beautiful, where you're just totally in it. You're not worrying about how you're looking while you're doing it. You don't have one eye in the mirror to see how you're doing. You're just fully doing it. So the truth is, I protect myself from anyone's reactions to my work, so I can just do the work fully without anticipating any sort of response to it. So I can't even answer. I will tell you that I'm in Steamboat Springs, Colorado for a wonderful literary festival. And this woman did come to me yesterday and say about Ghost Dogs. Yeah, a lot of stuff is repeated. You bring up a lot of repetition in your book. I said, well, they were written over 30 years. So yeah, I'm going to mention the girlfriend in one and the grandfather again in the other one. But you're right. Maybe I should have made that a little bit better. But thank you for your comment. And I'll share that later.
I think the only thing that I will share is that a few books ago, I was so excited because somebody called me and said, you got a full page rave in the Washington Post. So of course I read it out loud. I tattooed it on my forehead. An hour later, I got a full page Pan from the Philadelphia Inquirer who hated everything that the Washington Post loved. So I was sitting there feeling very sort of schizophrenic, saying, well, who is right? And then I realized they're right for themselves. They're not right for me. I'm just going to put the reviews away and put my head down and write my next book, which is all you can do. It's all you can do.
And if you know, and my father used to say this, and I agree with him. If you believe the good ones, you got to believe the bad ones.
Right.
So you may as well protect yourself from it all.
Right.
Not in Caroline's case. No.
Yes, in my case.
I'm going to take this time to talk about how I'm coming at this a little bit from a different angle. I'm going to talk about the Concord Free Press for a minute.
Yes, and I was going to ask you, Jean, I
gonna
did not
take-
forget.
No, I'm going to just take this time to talk about that instead of, so with my book, Mother Love, I will tell you that I had a very, very, very fancy agent to begin with, and she tried to get that book published. And I got love letters from publishers that were things like, this is the most important book I've read this year, and we're not publishing it. Okay. And because they were scared of, I'm writing about mothers who've children have killed people. There's not going to be an audience, da 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 da, blah, blah, all the stuff that goes that about the publishing business. Okay. And it was over about a year, and she really tried, and very, very big deal publishers, great things, incredible comments. I could put them on the back of my book, but they were ultimately no's. So then I tried to get my book published by a few small presses, and I lucked upon the Concord Free Press, which the thing about the Concord Free Press, it's concordfreepress.com. They are, well, first of all, people on the board of directors, Joyce Carol Oates. I mean, if you look at the board of directors, it's all incredible writers. Stona Fitch, I think you might know him, Andre. I don't know, Caroline, if you do,
I
but
do.
yeah, and they up until me, they had published all really famous people, because their whole idea is to publish a book, give it away for free, and ask people to donate to the charity of their choice. And for each book, they make about $40,000 to $50,000 in charity.
Wow.
Now,
It's
to
great.
get a small press advance for me would have been, even if, I mean, not much money, blah, blah, blah. So going with the Concord Free Press, and they loved my book. And that's the review part. They
That's the deal.
loved my book. And I knew it would be a quality experience. So to have, and this is, as a writer, I can say this, to have a quality experience where someone adores your book, publishes it, helps you get, and this is so unlikely for a small press, hired a fancy publicist. Caroline knows this, and, did all sorts of stuff to help me get essays out, publicize my book, and do readings all over the place. I want to say that has been experience of a lifetime. So anybody out there who wants to get my book, go to concordfreepress.com.
Yeah, that's excellent. Supporting authors in general is just such a wonderful thing, because in turn, it is so enriching to readers, reading all these wonderful books, all of yours, and so many all of them from the Salem Lit Fest this year. They've just been fabulous and so varied. Jean, Andre, and Caroline, I want to thank you so much for being part of Lit Fest 24.
Thank you.
Absolutely. There's more ahead. Our festival doesn't end until late this afternoon. I'll get into that in just a moment. I'd like to shout out to our supporters and sponsors and partners who help us keep the Lit Fest free. The Salem Athenaeum, the Salem Public Library, Salem Cultural Council, Wicked Good Books, the House of the Seven Gables, Salem Maritime National Historic Site, Essex National Heritage, Theater in the Open, Leonardo Audio, Molecule Literary Magazine, Salem 5, Salem State University Berry Library, where we had our YA sections yesterday, Salem Academy Charter School, which will be a hotspot this afternoon. I'll tell you about that in a moment. Peabody Essex Museum, and readers like you who, if you can, donate to the festival. Thanks to our audience for joining us and supporting our authors. Buy the books, which can be found at our sponsor, Wicked Good Books in Salem, or from your favorite booksellers. And next up this afternoon, those of you who can make it to Salem, join us in person at the Salem Academy Charter School. It's near Derby Street. It's near Pickering Wharf. If you know that area, it's easy to find. We have 2 final sessions of LitFest 24. We will be hearing from a Nobel Prize winner and this year's Pulitzer Prize winner in biography. The Nobel Prize winner is Susan Solomon, who's the author of Solvable: How We Heal the Earth and How We Can Do It Again, a hopeful discussion about what we can do about our changing climate. And then an hour later, Elian Wu, the 2024 Pulitzer Prize in biography winning author of Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. That's our One Book, One Salem community read selection this year. We will also have a Spanish language translator in what is a really cozy auditorium. It's not a big, massive auditorium. You'll feel very comfortable there. It's great. Register for these sessions at salemlitfest.org. Again, many thanks to our authors. This has been wonderful. I wish I could extend this for another hour or two. We'd just keep going and going. Good luck on your books. And have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you,
Thank you
Diane.
so much.
Diane.
Thank you so
dear
much,
readers.
Diane.
Thank you, readers.
Thank you, readers.
So long.
What? Jean.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to close it now.